Hi there. I'm Eric Wordweaver Sjerven, Goathie of the Ridgar folk here in East Texas, and I'd like to welcome you to The Raven's Call. This is a show where I ramble on about different heathen-related subjects, just kind of whatever strikes my fancy, sets my mind on fire at the time. Big UPG warning at the beginning of this episode, like always. I do not count myself to be a master of any of this. I'm just one Goathie here in East Texas, one heathen who likes to talk and share stuff out, and people seem to enjoy the videos, so I continue to do so. But these are meant to be conversation starters. I am not the end-all be-all of any point within heathenry, Asatru, Norse paganism, whatever it is you want to call it. Foreshadowing for the episode. And these are only meant to get you started on your, maybe thinking outside the box, maybe reevaluating something you hadn't thought about before, maybe shining a different kind of light on something than what you saw before. And so just take them with a grain of salt and go on with your life and do what you do and just hopefully have some fun conversations out of it. And if I trip across something that might be enlightening, cool, rock on, good deal. So, housekeeping stuff, all of my contact info's down below. You guys know the drill. The Facebook group is where I get a lot of stuff, emails. I get a lot of my flashback to the D&D stuff. Check the post credits for all that. I get a lot of my show ideas from like emails and sometimes comments and stuff that happen on the Facebook group, sometimes in chat groups that I'm on the side. But like today's episode is born from an email that I got. And so, I definitely read those. I don't always get to reply to them because time. It's ridiculous. But I do read them, and I'll catalog them for, hey, that's a cool show idea. Hey, that's a cool show idea. So keep that in mind. Send in your requests, and I will do what I can to get them on the channel. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into today's subject. Now, today's subject comes from an email written in by DJ. I'm not going to give DJ's last name out of consideration, but it comes from this email where DJ is fresh and new to the religion and is curious about some of the differences between like heathenry, Asatru, Norse paganism, the terminology and the names used. And this is something that I tend to talk about periodically, not something I give a whole lot of time to, but I give some. Largely because it's just a matter of semantics for a large point, but I think it's something that it pays to come back and revisit, especially as people grow and develop within their folkway. Now, this is a conversation also that was recently had in one of my tribal chats with some of my near folk community that I didn't get to participate in, but I got to look in on. And I was like, hey, this is good stuff, and it ties into this email. So, I'll get to give my 2 cents here since I missed that particular conversation on the chat. It was working. Anyway, so the difference between the terminologies when it comes to heathenry, Asatru, Norse paganism, etc., 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 as well as kind of the different genres of heathenry and how things go about it. The whole thing of what's in a name. And, for a religion and a folk way that you guys have seen in the previous videos that have said that, naming something gives it value. Naming something makes it real. Naming something has power and recognizes the spirit within a thing. And that's a point we're going to come back to here in a little bit. So just kind of keep that in mind because it's going to seem a little counter at first, but then it'll change. Okay? So, the gist of the names when it comes to heathenry, Asatru, Norse paganism, whatever, I find for most people I don't harp too much on what they choose to call themselves because it doesn't really matter. I have come to accept the fact that people utilize the terms as catch-alls. I do it myself. A lot of times I'll tag my stuff, Asatru, heathenry, Norse paganism, Odinism, all that stuff, even though what I do is not particularly Asatru. What I do is definitely not Odinism. But most people who search and look, especially the uninitiated, don't have a clue. They don't see the differences in the gentle nuances of the terminology and what they mean, what that impact is on tribal structure and things like that. So, what does the name mean? What do these names mean? Well, the one that's probably most commonly known and most commonly used and probably most commonly misused is the term Asatru. Now, Asatru, of course, is a modern term, most famously popularized by the Asatruarfélagið, which is the Asatru Fellowship in Iceland, an officially recognized religion by the state of Iceland again after some years, since the year 1000, I believe, is when Iceland converted. And it is structurally, if you look at Asatru, Asatru itself is very New Age in its approach to heathenry. Definitely not Reconstructionist. It is very New Age, almost on the border of Wicketru in some of the ways that it does things. Please do not take offense when I boil down the names. I'm working with generalizations. Stick till the end and you will see why. Because there is a reinforcing value for you, okay? If I step on anybody's feelings with a name, stick till the end, I will make it right, okay? I will make it right. So, most of the time what I see with Asatru is that people are more of a New Agey bent. They're more Wicketru in their approach to things. There's less focus on necessarily research and more focus on kind of... it's based heavily on Wiccan structure, given a Norse veneer. Hence why I get the term Wicketru. Because the spell structure, the ritual structure largely does this. The approach to lore, the approach to how they solve some problems and work their way through some things, very kind of Wicca-ish in the way that they approach things. It's hard to pin down because it's just kind of a generalized feel. There are some strong points, especially if you get down to like Wheel of the Year and stuff like that, where it's very evident there's some heavy crossover, so much so that you can't deny influence. Okay, it's as simple as that. And then there is just the generalized, because it's such a popularized name, a lot of things get tagged under Asatru that aren't necessarily Asatru. People will grab it thinking that as long as they're worshiping the gods, they're Asatru. I'm like, well, yes and no. Asatru is pretty well delineated by the Asatruarfélagið because that's their role. That's what they do. That's their official religion within Iceland. And we have watered-down versions of it or bastardized versions of it all over the world. But they don't necessarily jive 100%, and that's fine. Again, I'll make things right at the end. Hang on. So, that's some on the term of Asatru. The other term that's most frequently used is heathenry. Now, heathenry I utilize heavily because it is kind of a catch-all term for Germanic Northern European heathenry. It doesn't necessarily focus specifically on Norse Icelandic, which is a point I guess I should have made on Asatru. Asatru tends to have a very Norse Icelandic bent. The overall aesthetic that informs Asatru is Norse Icelandic in nature. That's the terminology they use, the imagery that they use. The overall aesthetic is Norse Icelandic, and there's nothing wrong with that. I tend to lean more Norse Icelandic myself, but that's where my ancestors are from, and that's where I feel the greatest pull. Except for things that I localize heavily localize. Again, wait till the end. And so heathenry itself is more encompassing of generalized Northern Europe and encompasses a lot of like the more Germanic tribes as a whole and doesn't just singularly focus on Norse Icelandic. There's still a heavy bent of Norse Icelandic, largely because of Viking culture. This is where you're going to see a lot more of the... Well, I say that. I mean, you're going to see Brosatru in both, but a lot of the like Viking guys are going to lean more towards the heathenry side of things because they don't want the identity of the organized Asatru religion. Even they're going to look at Asatru as kind of crystal wavy and not give it a whole lot of credence. And so they'll pull back and use the term heathenry, even though they themselves have a very superficial approach to it and are only surface level in a lot of things. This ends up being a watered down, very Brosatru kind of approach to heathenry. And so that in and of itself dilutes the term. heathen. Now, heathen, of course, is a derogatory term from back in the day. Back in the day during the conversion, Christians were trying to convert en masse, and usually that occurred by converting centers of power, kings, um, you know, lords, ladies, positions of power within a social structure that then mandated the conversion of all of their citizenry underneath them. This would, in turn, mean that as a result, large cityscapes and social centers would convert first. And it would take longer for this to reach out into the countryside or the heath in Northern Europe. And thus, the naming structure of the en suffix means people of. So, heathen actually translates to people of the heath or country bumpkins. And this was a derogatory term, meant that, these people are old school. It basically, heathen was the old school boomer. If you call somebody a heathen, they were, old school and unwilling to catch up with the times. And, everybody in the city is turning Christian. Why haven't you guys caught up? Okay, boomer. It was literally that kind of a thing. Now, it later through the years began to take on the terminology of anybody who's not Christian, especially with the massive influence of Christianity. It probably rapidly took on that meaning. But so there's some blur there too, because even though Norse/Germanic pagans, Northern European pagans, those that follow the Aesir and Dani and whatnot, by taking this terminology on and trying to make it our own, it's that whole it's calling the big guy tiny. It's embracing it and turning it to make it our own and reclaiming the term, being like, fine, you're going to call me that, I'm going to make it something awesome. And, thumb your nose at the, theocracy that has driven you out kind of thing. And so there's some baggage that goes along with the term. I still use it most frequently because it's my favorite catch-all, because it is kind of pan-Germanic in nature. It encompasses everything from the mainland all the way up into Scandinavia. And so I like it as a catch-all term. But I do understand the complexities of the term. I also understand that, much like the term Asatru, it has been watered down by overuse. I myself am probably guilty of adding to that watering down by virtue of the fact that I do use it as a pan-Germanic catch-all. And so, there's that. Still, nonetheless, it's probably the term that I most frequently use to describe myself, simply because it is the easiest to translate an image to others that are in the know. I do not use Asatru to describe myself, simply because there's a lot of baggage along with that term that definitely does not reflect my approach. My approach to heathenry is not Asatru. That is not how I do things. That's not how I go about things. Technically speaking, the way I go about heathenry isn't technically heathen. Maybe. I don't know. It's such a catch-all, ambiguous term that it's hard to say what is and isn't heathen, as it were. So, perhaps that mine is so laser focused that it's something else. Again, stay tuned. We're coming back to that. Now, onwards from that, you get other terminology that pops up. You're going to end up with Norse/Germanic pagan or Northern European pagan or whatnot. These are catch-all terms for people that don't want to be identified with organized religion. The pagan is the main focus of that terminology, and then after that, the Northern European / Norse Icelandic / Germanic, whatever adjective they want to add on there, what kind of identifier they want to add to this paganry. Pagan is the operative term here, meaning specifically that they are eschewing organized religion and focusing heavily on the individualized spiritual aspects of heathenry. Now, somebody who identifies themselves this way tells me a lot about themselves. It tells me that within the kind of generalized heathen sphere, which I'm going to continue using heathen as my catch-all reference point, so you've got the backstory on that now. You know that I'm just using it as a catch-all. But for those that are in this heathen sphere, those that use the, regionalized pagan term are lost, and they don't really know their place in that circuit yet. They don't really understand where they fall or what they believe and the context for it. They may know what they believe, they may know what they think, but they haven't really found their niche yet, which is fine. It's fine. It's a process. He Becoming heathen is not an overnight thing. It's not an instantaneous conversion. I've done a lot of things on kind of the process of conversion into heathenry, but it's kind of piecemeal throughout my different videos. I may need to do a specific video and kind of pull that together for people that are going through that transition and experiencing that, so they get kind of a generalized picture of what to expect, because it is a process. There's the initial period of rejecting the previous culture through the adoption of the new culture, the eschewing of the previous culture, and demonization of the previous culture, because you have to make it anathema in order for the mind to divest itself from the culture basis and establish the new paradigm. However, this leads to cognitive dissonance when there is crossover between the paradigms, and you have to somehow reconcile those similarities. Frequently, it is by devaluing the predecessor and placing all veracity on the new culture. This is frequently done by taking an urban legend or any kind of superfluous information that might support the structure of the new culture. And it's not until they develop beyond that into synthesis and into the full deep adoption of the culture that they begin to realize that they don't need to do that. That period of time, that rejection phase, is where they identify themselves by what they're not. I'm not Christian. Unlike Christians, we do this. We don't celebrate that. We celebrate this. Eventually they get to a fully synthesized and adopted version of heathenry, wherein they don't have to reference anything else at all in order to say what they are. It's like, yeah, in our belief, we do this. I don't have to tag it on to anything else. It's like everybody's standing around talking about their holiday plans, and they're like, what are your plans for Christmas? It's like, actually, we do Yule, and these are my plans for Yule. This is what we do. So there, you've been educated on my culture all of a sudden. Welcome to my TED Talk. Cultural awareness, heathenry. There you go. That's how that works. So that's that deeper synthesis and that comfort in where you are. That's that comfort in being yourself and fully adopting that within your identity and not letting yourself have to be identified by something else. Now, a lot of the people that are in that kind of generalized regional paganry, I find, are kind of in that phase. Not a universal, guys. Remember that. Not a universal. There are people that are in that are fully identified, and what they've done is they've established hearth cult, and they have focused entirely upon hearth cult and haven't developed into tribal or, clan is usually eschewed in that. It's usually very individualized, and these are islands. I find that that's what that is. That's a cluster of islands. If tribal heathenry is an archipelago, these are spotty islands out in the ocean that can't even be tied together as any kind of group, because they are so individualized, so unique, that they actively resist being included into something else. But in the same, they need so desperately to belong that they include themselves into this amalgamation of soup. It's heathen soup. Which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. That's where they're at. That's what their basis is. I'm not shaming it at all. They do what they need to do. I don't honestly care, because ultimately, not my hall, not my call doesn't impact my heathenry. I don't really care what other people call themselves. This is a big thing for me. I use it to identify and observe. It's the psychologist / sociologist in me. If they use a certain term or name, I look at it and say, okay, well, what does this tell me about this person? What can I draw from this piece of demographic information that's going to give me a deeper insight into this individual and allow me to judge whether or not there's someone that with which I want to share weird and establish any kind of relationship. Is this person going to be frithworthy, or is this person someone I need to keep at arm's length because they may not necessarily jive with my worldview? So, with all of that, that generalized pagan means that, I'm going to look at that person and be like, well, okay, I can't tell a lot from that. I genuinely can't. And the biggest thing I can probably tell is they probably haven't solidified a lot of their belief structure and tend to use a very loose-based belief structure. Okay. Different from how I do it, so we're probably not going to have a whole lot in common, because I do have a very structured religious structure, a very nuanced and kind of free-flowing spiritual culture. I have my tribal clan hearth culture, and then I've got, my philosophical beliefs, my big four pillars of heathenry: our relationship with the gods, which is religion; our relationship with the spiritual realm and the unseen, that is the spiritual side, that's ancestors, Vatir, all of that; our interaction with each other, which is cultural; and then our deeper understanding of the concepts of the world and how the world works, which is the philosophy. And so, big four pillars of heathenry, in my view. And so I look at somebody who uses the regionalized pagan view approach and terminology as probably not being that established in how they go about their heathenry. If they're happy where they're at and they're good and jiving with it, okay, no skin off my nose. It doesn't impact me at all. I have more power to them. Hope they're happy and hope they find their way. Awesome. You do you. Not my hall, not my call. Not going to get involved. So the only time that even then I'm not going to get involved, I'm going to distance myself. There are certain terminologies that I will distance myself from because of baggage that goes along with it. And they're hot button terms, so I don't typically use certain terms. There's some deep philosophical reasons for why I don't use some of these terms. You heard me reference Odinism earlier. That is one I will not use in describing myself, even though I myself am a follower of Odin. As far as the one that I feel most approached to, most tied to, most called by, I worship all of the Aesir, and I worship the associated Vanir. I worship the tribe of the gods, but I do identify heavily with Odin, so I will frequently call myself an Odinsman. But Odinism is different because Odinism was born out of the prison system over in the UK, and that specific terminology and all the literature and everything that is based around Odinism comes from a very racially charged background. That is not to say that all people who practice Odinism today or call themselves Odinists. Let me say that. Not all people who call themselves Odinists are, racist and part of that kind of subculture, but that is where it came from. That is its origin basis. And it is not something that I want to identify with. So I eschew that particular terminology. And if I find somebody who does use that terminology but doesn't identify that way, frequently I'll educate them on the origin of the terminology and then let them kind of do whatever they want with that information. Frequently I see them shift away from it more to a generalized heathen. That's kind of the melting pot where I see a lot of people, once they develop past superficial phases and kind of land into just kind of their space, a lot of them end up in the term heathen, just because it's a comfort space for people that do have a mix of recon and new development, new growth approaches. That's that melting pot of heathenry, as it were. So, there are other ones that I don't truck with. You guys saw my video on Rokatru. I don't truck with that. Go back and watch the video if you want the detailed rundown on it. I'm not going to waste the screen time going on it again. The one that frustrates people is that I don't particularly like the term folkish. There is a lot of debate about folkism, and I'm not going to get into it right now. But I do not feel like that term accurately reflects my approach to heathenry, so I do not use it, and I do not associate with groups that utilize that terminology. 5 minutes on the internet will give you the reasons why. I full well expect to get flamed in the comments by folkish individuals. I've already been attacked for my supposedly anti-folkish approach to heathenry, and okay, yeah, that's fine. I don't like the term folkish because I think it is a misnomer. I think that it is the way that it is phrased and the way that it is set up is racially based, and it is not reflective of the actual important part of heathenry, which is the belief structure. It's a focus on an over-focus on genetic lines to a point of dangerous approach, and it eschews the interaction with the gods and the ties to the spirit realm. It devalues non-genetically homogeneic ancestry. It complicates matters in a way that a lot of people, like most of the people that I've interacted with that use the term don't realize. And they definitely don't count themselves as being racist. Um, but there's some heavy racial baggage that goes along with that, largely because a lot of the folkish movement grew out of very racially biased bases. I mean, the seed that planted that was very racially charged. And so that continues even with the national orgs that utilize that terminology. They've been caught numerous times in espousing ideologies that don't necessarily jive with the way that I approach things, which is I don't care what race you are. I don't care where your ancestry comes from, as long as you honor them and you honor the gods, and you mind your weird and your interactions, your Gefray and all of that. You're heathen in my book, you know. African, Asian, whatever, I don't care. Also, don't have an issue with your gender identity or sexual preference, any of that, because none of my business. Not my hall, not my call. The gods genuinely don't care who you bed or, you know, what you're attracted to or even how you identify yourself in that respect. They look at your deeds and your actions, and, you know, that's, you know, they're going to be far more interested in someone who honors them and goes through the rituals and upholds their end of the bargain, regardless of their approach. If anything, looking back to our ancestry, we see that, you know, different regions of heathenry during the arch-heathen times, which is a massive span of time. Northern Europeans adopted everything that they came across. We found, you know, jewelry and all kinds of things from everywhere that were brought in because they were like, oh, cool, this is new, let's bring it home. One of the issues that we have with pinning down issues of syncretism within heathenry is because they did adopt a lot of things from places that they went. They were adaptive individuals, and that's how they survived. That's, you know, the conversion of Northern Europe was a mass adaptation, and all you have to do is look at folklore and everything to see how these things survived, to see that, you know, yeah, they just adapted and rolled with it and still kept their core beliefs in place. So anyway, that's neither here nor there, but that's kind of why I'll eschew those terms, because they are heavy with baggage, and not baggage that I want to be associated with in any way, shape, form, or fashion. And I imagine I'll get hate mail off of that, but it is what it is. Yeah. So other terminology that may pop up that you're going to see are going to be things like that don't even necessarily sound like it, like Theodish belief. All right. Theodish belief was born off of, you know, a specific brand of Theod. I am not an expert on Theodish belief. I do have a friend who is, and so he is one of my dearest friends, and he has educated me as much as he can on Theodish belief and the way they do things so that we can have conversations. And they have more of an Anglo-Saxon approach in their aesthetic, but not all of them do. It's not like the aesthetic is baked into the terminology. Just being Theodish doesn't mean you're Anglo-Saxon, but a lot of the terminology that they will use is Anglo-Saxon, Old English in nature, just like with kind of generalized heathenry. You're going to get a mix of Norse Icelandic, Germanic terminology, and also true like Old Norse Icelandic terminology. But theirs is more of a Reconstructionist approach. At least it leans more heavily to Reconstructionist, with a healthy appreciation for individualized hearth culture. I would say that their tribal approach is probably more Reconstructionist, while their hearth culture is left to be more freeform and growing, which is, I dig that. I have a lot of respect for how they do that. It's a good job. Rock on, guys. Get it done. Now, even then, politics and all that other crap, there's been some division within Theodish belief, and a lot of the people that used to identify as Theodish don't identify as Theods anymore because of tomfoolery from Garmin Lord and all this stuff. So, talk to the Theodsman if you want the details on that. I am not an expert on that, so I'm not even going to go there. But, I mean, the gist of everything that I've gathered is that they are venturing, at least his group, and some of the others are venturing into the area where some of the other groups that I've seen are venturing, which really excites me about the future. And that's this next category that I'm going to get into. That big promise where I said I was going to make everything right, guys. All right? So here we go. The truth of what you call yourself is your tribe. Tribal differences, and this is something that I've built on for ages and have harped on and pushed because of grassroots heathenry and why the big organized religion. Heathenry is still an organized religion because there is organization to how we interact with the gods. There is structure, but we're not like mega church, big book religions where there's a huge hierarchy, all this stuff. We have our individualized hierarchies, and they are unique to the tribe. They are unique to the hearth. And this is where I see a lot of people going. And this is part of the conversation that my buddy and I were having, have had numerous times, and most recently popped up again in the chat, edifying another one of the members of the group. And that is that it's becoming increasingly common for people to kind of eschew those catch-all terms and say, we believe what we believe. Like for me, my tribe, it would be less, like if you were to ask, okay, what is the belief structure of Ridgar? I would say that it's Ridgar's belief structure. Because it is, what is your religion? Ridgar. We are ostensibly heathen, but we are very uniquely our own because we are an amalgamation of Norse Icelandic and some mainland Europe, but a heavy dose of Texan because that's how we approach things. That's who we are. That is our world. And that spatial approach to heathenry means that you are incorporating the world around you. So some of the things that would have been staples for Norse Icelandic heathens would not necessarily be staples for those of us here in East Texas, where the fauna and the flora are different, where the seasons are different. Our seasonal structure mandates that our holiday structure has to shift. Things that we do at certain times of year would not be what they did there because our seasonal structure is not the same. You get down to the why. Why did they have the holidays when they had the holidays? Well, it was based on seasonal progression. It was based on the presence of the gods and goddesses, their attention on the world in that period of time. And it tends to be during that period of time that, Idun smiles upon, Northern Europe and you get your crops, Well, our crop season is different here in Texas. It stretches differently. Our season of summer is considerably different. As you get into different climate zones, you're going to see different influences. It's entirely possible that different parts of the world garner the attention of different gods and goddesses based on kind of where they favor. You may find that, certain areas are far more in with the sun-associated gods and goddesses, such as, Baldur and Idun. You may find certain areas more tied to the darker gods, Odin's heavy influence and whatnot. But Odin rides the world over as the seasons turn. I mean, are you going to find the wild hunt in, the Cayman Isles? I don't know. I genuinely don't know. And then you get the flip side of hemispheres, because if you flip the hemispheres over and you go to the southern world, the southern hemisphere, you're going to find that the seasons are completely flipped. Around Yule time for the rest of us, Australia is having a glorious summer. A lot of their holiday stuff is built around going to the beach and having a great beach days and whatnot. That's just how they do it. Completely alien to us because most of the mass media coverage for everything comes from a northern hemisphere bent. But southern hemisphere does things completely different because the seasons are different. And that's where it is. You meet the where you are. You don't force somewhere else onto your surrounding world, then you're acting disjointedly from the world around you. That deviates heavily from the spiritual aspect of heathenry, wherein you are working with the Vatir and ancestor spirits and everything. Working with the Vatir specifically, and these very earth-centric spirits, you've got to work with the seasons. It's the same kind of thing. You need to work with the seasons, especially if you're going to be honoring the gods and goddesses from the religious standpoint of things, tailoring things to when they're there. If you go along with the gods of limited access approach like I do, there's definitely times where their attention is more focused on us. Not that they're inaccessible in other times, but they're less accessible, I would say. I definitely like to capitalize on when their attention is turned to our region. And so when I feel the wild hunt ride through East Texas, I know it's time to blow up to Olden. And I need to be ready for that. And I know about the time of year it typically happens. I watch for weather stuff. It blew through here not too long ago, and we'll probably ride through a couple more times before the season is out. But I am 100. I was at work the other night when it blew through, and I am 100% convinced it was the wild hunt, and it was a humdinger of a ride, let me tell you. And so, but it's something that's very specific to this time of year, and it's just something I can feel. It's I don't have a scientific approach for it on this one. It's just a tingle in the back of my neck when I look outside and I can read the wind and feel the weather and just know, okay, this one's the hunt, guys. Buckle up. And I'll usually send something to my tribe. I'll be like, all right, batten the hatches, guys. The hunt rides through tonight. Keep an eye out. And yeah, we'll roll from there. But this is how it should be for every tribe. Every tribe should have their own belief structure. The idea of this overarching terminology is the exact same problem I have with national orgs, with racially identified politics, with any of this. It's false kinship. False kinship, false association. It is the need to over-identify and therefore to pigeonhole ourselves into terminology that nearest fits us. It's like with the political structures in America, you get people that identify as Republican or Democrat, and it doesn't fit either one of them. Then you get those that step out and be like, I'm one of the independents, or I'm a libertarian, and it's like, well, does it really fit your belief all the way, or is that just kind of the nearest niche fit? And by doing that, do you allow this zeitgeist of overarching belief structure within this culture that you've shoehorned yourself into to influence and overwrite some of your actual belief structures? Do you find yourself supporting things that you wouldn't otherwise support if stepped away and been like, you know what, that's not really how I believe? An over need to identify, an over need to codify, and to group. It's the way the human brain works. That's how we understand the vast amount of information around us. I understand this. They're heuristics. It's natural. It's normal human behavior. It takes some active deviation from that to recognize where those delineations need to occur. These handy-dandy terms are out there and make it easy for us to just, okay, that's where the division needs to be, and so it's easy to adopt and therefore codify the rest of what you observe around you by those terms. However, those terms are lies. Those terms don't exist. They're catch-alls. They're hodgepodges. They don't, other than like Asatru, which actually is an organized religion and therefore is codified with its whole thing. The term Asatru itself doesn't necessarily reflect that, though, because all of the North American Asatru that adopt this term and have no clue whatsoever that the Asatrur Felagate actually exists. Do they really qualify? I mean, what's the deal here, I don't know. Not Asatru. I don't go that route. Don't care, honestly, because I feel like the term is misleading in the fact that it is indeed a catch-all. It's just like the idea of arch-heathen. There is no arch-heathen time. I myself will refer to arch-heathen time because it's easy. That is to say, the times of antiquity, the times of old, the times where heathenry was normal. I use the term heathenry, which is a catch-all phrase, which is overly amalgamized and creates a false sense of kinship amongst those that are lumped into that terminology. Just because another individual is heathen doesn't mean we have anything in common. It doesn't even mean we worship the same gods or in the same way, or that we have belief structures that even jive with each other. It's not a given. It isn't. So again, false kinship, all over the place, because it's how the human brain works, and we need to make that work. But that's because we're in a period of time wherein heathenry and our belief structures, individualized, are all growing and developing. We are in a generation that is adopting belief in the old gods on a level that has been unseen for 1,000 years. Ever since the conversion of Iceland and then the subsequent falling of the rest of mainland Europe, they all fell in different times and whatnot, but you get the idea. We haven't seen this kind of an influx of belief in the old gods on a mass scale since then. And it's incredible. It's awesome. But it also means that people are going to fall into superficial approaches, because there are those of us that have been doing this for decades, and then there are those that have been doing it for months or for a couple of years, and they need time to grow. They need time to develop. They need time to understand. We also don't have unbroken chains of tradition and approach that would be ideal for fostering these new tribes, these new clans, these new hearths into this world of belief structure. In the olden days, the arch-heathen days, they didn't even have a name for heathenry because there wasn't an overarching belief structure. There are commonalities across belief structures throughout Northern Europe into Norway, Iceland, all of that. Commonalities in approach to bloat, commonalities in praxis, the way that they did things. Commonalities, not necessarily congruence, but commonalities. Enough to say that there was probably some kind of accepted way of going about things. But it doesn't take much to scratch the surface and see that individual belief structures differed. Study of superstitions, study of the sagas and looking at different ways these people approached, different focuses. You look at some of the stories which are, like Raffenkel Freysgoldi. Just because Raffenkel went about his worship of Frey in the way that he did does not mean that everybody else would have. Look at the difference between Norway and Sweden in the way that they approach the gods. Look at some of the things that you find in Uppsala versus some of the things that you find in mainland Europe. You are going to find significant regional differences if you just barely scratch the surface. Now, the basis of sacrifice may be the same. The basis of the praxis may be similar. But like the Uppsala practice of the 9 every 9 years, that's unique to Uppsala and not the rest of the world as far as I can tell. That's something that's very specifically kind of a Swedish approach to heathenry. And that's Swedish because another problem with these catch-all phrases is that they are based on our minds right now, which means we are talking about them in terms of the borders and boundaries that we understand in our heads at this exact moment. This is the frame of reference from which they originate. And the problem with that is none of these borders existed back then. They were completely different. Some of the countries that we talk about back then, like if you talk about Gaul, and the heathen influences in Gaul and their approach, Gaulish heathenry, Gaulish paganism. Gaul's not a thing anymore. I mean, you're looking at France, you're looking at the countries that it became, but it's not Gaul anymore. Not as we knew it. So same thing with Norway and Sweden. The boundary between Norway and Sweden did this for so long, the skirmishes back and forth. Hell, it was all Denmark at one point in time. That's kind of what I'm getting at is it's a misnomer. It is a misstep. It is an assumption that it's a heuristic that we don't even realize that we're making. And you got to be able to step aside from that, step away from that, and be like, okay, so what is the takeaway from all of this? And be like, okay, well, the takeaway is be me. Just be me. You want that rugged individualism that America is based on? For my American viewers, here it is. Work on your hearth cult. Do you. Don't let anybody else tell you how to do your hearth cult. Build your hearth cult. But pay attention to your whys and pay attention to how you build it and the virtues upon which you build it, because you may find, even though your hearth cult is sacrosanct and no one can mess with it, no one may want to associate with you if you're based on bullshit. If you go in and you build your hearth cult on racially charged stuff, you're only going to interact with racially charged individuals, and this is going to create an echo chamber. If you find that you are very anti-hardcore recon, then your hearth cult is not going to jive with anybody that has hardcore recon as a basis or a significant aspect of their approach. Understand that. You're going to create echo chambers and you're going to build, but it doesn't mean you have to be pigeonholed into your echo chamber. That's where the danger comes with these terms. We build our echo chambers and we throw ourselves into them, and then we get guided by it. We kind of ride that wave, and breaking out of that wave gets bullied back in. Pagans are some of the worst bullies I've ever run into when it comes to deviation and whatnot. If you don't believe what they believe, they will get stupid. Just in general, okay? That includes heathens, that includes some Asatru I know, that includes some Celtic pagans. I have seen some of the biggest bullies in the world come from this because they have snap reactions because they're still in a superficial phase themselves. And if what you espouse deviates from what they espouse, they will try and hammer you into their belief structure because it's a place of insecurity, and they need you to believe like they do in order to validate what they do, because they're still looking for an external location, external locus of validation, and that's not where it is, guys. An internal locus of validation is what you need. You need an internal locus of control. This needs to be okay with you and only you. You don't need to identify with anybody else. I don't even share the vast majority of Ridgar's belief structure with the outside world because it's none of their damn business. None of it. None yet. And no offense to you guys, but I'm not going to sit here and share everything that we believe out on the YouTube channel. Yeah, a lot of what I share on here is from the mindset that birthed the Ridgar belief structure, and so there's going to be some similarities there, but that's because it's what I believe. You know, that's how I go about things. And that's what you guys like, so that's why I keep sharing it. But the validation in this is that you need to develop your own hearth cult. You need to develop your own tribal structure. You need to develop your own tribal belief, your tribal cult. That is the essence of heathenry, Norse paganism, whatever you want to call it. You do you. Don't worry about those other terms, you know? I'm a Ridgarist. There. That's my belief structure. I'm a Ridgarist because that's what I believe. I believe in the belief structure of Ridgar, and that is what I have built my life around. That is what I have built my belief structure around, and that is something that I have had a very heavy hand in developing. So it very much reflects my belief structure. I try to amalgamate and incorporate those that enter my tribal structure and my oath web in a way that creates a space for them in that. And I recognize that hearth cult is sacrosanct, and I will not step on the hearth cult of any of my members. Their hearth cult is their own, and then my hearth cult is my own. My hearth cult is not my tribal cult. The way we do things as a tribe when we get together is a weird amalgamation of those. It is its own unique thing that we do at tribal festival, at tribal interactions, and the statutes for interacting amongst tribe is that. But hearth cult is hearth cult, and the way we do things in our individual hearths is sacrosanct. And I do not toe in with opinion. I do not toe in with, unless they ask me for some advice on maybe a mechanic or something like that, I just take whatever they give me and go with it and say, all right, cool. That's how you do Ridgar in your home. That's how you do your belief structure in your home. Because in your home, it's not the tribal structure. Like in my hearth is not necessarily Ridgar. My hearth is my hearth cult. So I guess hearth cult is my belief structure, and hearth cult grows into tribal belief structure, which, you know, well, hearth cult grows into clan belief structure, what grows into tribal belief structure, but it's not really that easy a progression because clan does not necessarily reflect belief structure. Clan reflects familial relations, and therefore not necessarily the same thing. Clans do grow into tribe as far as interacting clans and everything, but it's not like the entirety of a clan is in that tribe. Maybe representatives of that clan within that tribe. They're actually separate entities, and then it gets complicated. Wibbly wobbly. Yeah, it's a thing. So, this has been a long rant. I hope you guys have taken away something from it. What's in a name? Not a whole lot, actually, but then a whole lot. So it's both. It's Schrodinger's name. You can make a whole mess of stuff by who you choose to identify with and not accurately reflect your own belief structure by identifying with that terminology. And I would say don't worry about the terminology. Don't worry about the terminology. If you've got to find a catch-all so that you can have a conversation with another individual, you can find your comfort zone, find what works for you, and say, all right, well, we kind of believe like this, but we actually have like our own belief structure, and it doesn't need a catch-all because it doesn't need to be blended in with anything other than your tribe and your interactive hearths. So that would be my take on it personally. Getting away from these false kinship terms and towards more specific terms for your specific hearth cult, if it even needs one, because honestly, outside of your hearth, whose business is it, you know? So anyway, That's it. That's it, guys. That's the gist. That's the takeaway for what's in a name. Um, Go with that and do with it what you will. Um, I know I'm going to get people that got so far as to be pissed off about their specific name and did not see it all the way through. I know I'm getting that. So just wait. It'll pop up. I'll probably lose viewers over this one, but it is what it is. If I lose viewers, I know they didn't make it to the end of the video. Or maybe they did. I don't know. We'll see. Anyway, hail to you all. Thank you. And may your hearth fires burn bright. All right, let's give this a shot, guys. Here's a mess. Anyway, as far as back update goes, there's not gonna be a whole lot of post credit. I'm kind of crunched for time today, but I did want to kind of say, yeah, we had a D&D session this past weekend. It was awesome. It was great. Started off kind of laid back, and then turned out to be a really fun session, and we had a great time. And I had some, a few cool tricks that we played with, and we'll see in future sessions where this goes, because they only got about halfway through this particular quest, which is great. I've got enough quest lines laid out that I've got like content for the next couple of years at this rate, which is fine, because that lessens my work as a DM. I just pull up one of my quest lines, or rework it for whatever level they're at, and let them go, and it's a lot of fun. So yeah, so pro tip, just come up with quest concepts ahead of time, make yourself a list, and if you find yourself crunched for content for an upcoming session, go to ye old book of quests, and just pull one out and flesh it out. Figure out how to fit it into where you're at. Amend it to fit your party at their level. If you got downtime and you feel like that world building time that we like to do so much, where we're writing about nations and races and stuff like that, spend a little bit of that time writing scenarios. This is this like a Scooby-Doo episode, or this one's the one that we did this past weekend turned out to be kind of like a supernatural episode. They showed up and creatures had been kidnapping kids, and they had to figure out what it was and hunt it down, and yeah, it was a lot of fun. I can't say too much though, because they're in the middle of it and haven't finished it yet, so I'll have a little bit more after they finish the mission. We'll see where that goes. Anyway, in the meantime, we're going to go ahead and jump into today's episode. Stay tuned. I'll have more D&D stuff later. Somebody wrote in that they would like to see me do an entire D&D episode. I could do that. I think I've talked about that in the post-credits before. I could do that. I just don't have the time right now. If you can tell from the shadows and bags around my eyes, I'm very, very tired. So I'm working it in where I can, which is why I'm kind of pressed for time on this one, because I've waited until the last possible minute to film. Not the brightest idea, but it is what it is. Anyway, let's go ahead and jump into today's subject. A lot more people are going to start getting this reference now that they've re-released it on Netflix. But 3, 2, 1, let's jam.